Sera Winfield had a rule about December. Work harder, feel less, let the city's Christmas decorations be someone else's magic. She was good at this rule. She'd been keeping it for 8 years. Since the December, her mother died 2 days before Christmas and turned the holiday into something she participated in rather than she still bought gifts, she still hung a wreath, she still showed up to every office party with the precise calibration of warmth that made her seem present without actually being so. She was 32 years old and very, very good at seeming. The call from Rosie came on a Tuesday evening while Sera was recoloring a brand identity deck for the 7th time because the client kept changing his mind and she kept letting him. "You're coming home," Rosie said before hello. "Good evening to you too." "I'm not asking," Rosie said. "I'm informing. Dad booked your room. I told him the blue quilt is in the dryer and he said he'd take it out, but we both know he's going to forget, so I need you here by Friday at the absolute latest because, Rosie, I am 6 months pregnant and emotionally unhinged and I need my sister. You have Owen. Owen is wonderful and I love him and he doesn't know how to braid hair or make mom's shortbread or tell me when I'm being irrational in the exact tone that makes me feel better about being irrational." A pause. "I need you, Sera. 2 weeks. Cedar Falls. Say yes." Sera looked at the brand identity deck. She looked at the client's latest email, subject line, "What if we tried coral?" She looked at the window, where Chicago December pressed its gray, indifferent face against the glass. "I'll be there Friday," she said. She didn't know, when she hung up, that this particular yes was going to change everything. She also didn't know about Owen's phone call to Callum Price, made approximately 20 minutes later, which began, "Hey, so, hypothetically, how do you feel about Vermont?" To understand Sera's relationship with Callum Price, you had to understand that it had never, not once, been simple. They'd met at an industry panel 4 years ago. Sera had been on, Callum was in the audience. She'd made a point about the product, failure of large-scale commercial design to honor the human scale, a point she believed deeply, and a hand had gone up from the third row. "You're describing a values failure," said the man in the third row, "but you're diagnosing it as a technical one. Those require different solutions." She'd looked at him, composed, unhurried, dark-eyed, with the kind of face that suggested he was always slightly more interested in what you were saying than he let on. "Would you like to come up here and finish my panel?" she'd said. "Only if you want me to," he'd said, and the audience had laughed. And she'd felt something she'd immediately filed away as irritation. After that, 4 years of being in the same rooms, pitching for some of the same projects, existing in the same professional sphere, with the complex friction of two people who are genuinely good at the same things and cannot entirely pretend otherwise. She'd said the thing about him being creatively safe at a dinner 18 months ago. She'd said it to a client she was trying to win, and she'd meant it as strategy, and she'd said it without thinking. About the fact that Callum was across the room and the acoustics in that particular restaurant were excellent. She'd never apologized. She didn't know how to begin. What she didn't know that Callum had heard, had gone home and sat with it for 3 days and had then gone back to his studio and redesigned an entire project from scratch, not to prove her wrong, but because he'd held her words up to his work like a lamp and found that some of them illuminated something real. He had, in other words, taken her seriously even when she was being unkind. This was the thing about Callum Price that Sera had never been given. The information to understand. The drive from Chicago to Cedar Falls took 6 hours. If you drove straight through, and 4 if you were Rosie, who had a philosophy. About speed limits, that was optimistic at best. Sera drove straight through, arrived Friday at 3 in the afternoon, and sat in the driveway for a moment longer than necessary. The Winfield house, white clapboard, black shutters, a porch that wrapped all the way around the left side. Her father had hung the same wreath he hung every year, real balsam, tied with red ribbon, slightly lopsided, because he refused to use a level for something as intuitive as a wreath. Her mother used to straighten it every morning when he wasn't looking, and then pretend she hadn't when he came outside to admire his handiwork. Sera looked at the wreath and felt the familiar, specific ache of someone who has learned to carry grief like a stone in her pocket. Always there, usually ignorable, occasionally pressing. The front door opened. Her father, Theo, stood in the doorway in his Christmas sweater. The one Rosie had given him 3 years ago, dark green with a single reindeer that he wore with the uncomplicated love of a man who didn't overthink gifts. He looked at her, and his whole face did something that faces do when someone arrives who has been missed. "There she is," he said. She got out of the car and let him hug her, and for a moment she stood in the cold Vermont air in her father's arms and just let herself be held. "You look thin," he said. "You say that every time." "And I'm right every time." He took her bag from her shoulder without asking. "Rosie's asleep. She denies napping, but I caught her on the sofa." "Is Owen?" "He went to pick up some people from the train station," Theo said, opening the door. "He'll be back by dinner." Some people. Sera didn't think anything of it. She should have thought something of it. The inside of the Winfield house in December was an education in the specific beauty of things that have been loved for a long time. The kitchen still had the blue tiles her mother had chosen in 1993. The living room still had the reading chair her father had refused to, reupholstered despite 3 separate campaigns from his daughters. The mantel had the same arrangement of family photos updated occasionally, never reorganized, growing slowly denser the way family histories do. Sera dropped her bag in her childhood bedroom, which her father had, kept exactly as she'd left it except for new curtains he'd chosen. Himself, ivory with small sprigs of something, which was so entirely wrong for the room, and so entirely him that she felt a wave of affection so strong it almost knocked her sideways. She unpacked. She made tea. She sat at the kitchen table with her mug and the quiet of the house, and felt for the first time in months the specific exhale of being somewhere that didn't require her to perform. She was on her second cup when she heard the front door. Owen's voice, low, easy. Then another voice, deeper, unhurried. With that particular quality she associated with, she went still. She knew that quality. She stood up. Owen appeared in the kitchen doorway with the expression of a man who was aware he had made a decision of significant consequence and was doing his best to look innocent about it. "Hey, Sera, hi, great, you're up, so..." Callum Price appeared behind him. He stopped when he saw her. She stopped looking at Owen. They looked at each other across the kitchen of her childhood home in the particular silence of 2 people who have been in professional opposition for 4 years and have now run out of conference rooms to hide behind. "Sera," Callum said. "Callum," she said. Owen very quietly said, "So I might have forgotten to mention this." The explanation came from Owen standing at the kitchen counter with his hands raised in the universal posture of a man who is technically guilty but has good intentions. He and Callum had met through a hiking group 8 months ago. They'd become friends, good friends, in the easy way of men who don't make friendship complicated. He'd mentioned the Cedar Falls Christmas plan. Callum had mentioned he had no Christmas plans. His mother was coming to Chicago, but his apartment was small and The city in December felt, he'd said, like a place that had forgotten what it was for. Owen had invited him, without asking Rosie, who had found out 3 days ago, who had not told Sera, because Owen confessed with the expression of a man reading out his own verdict. Rosie had decided it was serendipitous, and that interfering with serendipity was bad luck, especially while pregnant. She said, "What?" Sera said. "She's emotional," Owen offered. "I'm going to. She's also very pregnant, and if you stress her out, the baby will feel it, and we've been told that." Owen. She genuinely thought it would be fine. Sera turned. Callum was still in the doorway, arms crossed, expression neutral in that particular way. That meant he was letting the situation resolve itself rather than adding to it, which she was beginning to understand was simply how he moved through crises. "There are 4 bedrooms," she said. 3, Owen said. "Theo's, yours, and ours." Callum was going to take the pullout in the study, but Rosie's prenatal pillow collection has colonized it. So? Owen pointed upward. The attic room, her mother's old sewing room, converted at some point into a bedroom, with sloped ceilings and a single window, and she was now remembering, with crystalline clarity, a full-size bed that 2 adults could share. If they were, for example, married, or if they were, for example, 2 professional rivals trapped in Vermont by a well-meaning pregnant woman and a hiking friendship. She looked at the ceiling. She looked at Callum. "I'll take the floor," he said. "You are not taking the floor in my family's house." "Then the arrangement is fine," she said. "The arrangement is fine. We're adults." She picked up her mug. "You should know that I get up at 6, and I am not pleasant until I've had coffee." "I know," he said. She stopped. "How do you know that?" Something moved across his expression, something she didn't have the vocabulary for yet. The conference call 18 months ago, the prior group presentation. You were 40 minutes early and you told someone on the phone that you weren't human until the second cup. He had remembered that. From 18 months ago, she turned back to her tea so he wouldn't see her face. Rosie came downstairs at 6, rumpled and glowing and absolutely unrepentant. She saw Sera's expression and opened her mouth first. "Before you say anything," Rosie said, "I want you to look at me." She gestured at herself, round belly, bare feet, radiant with the specific authority of someone growing a human. "Look at this. Look at what I am doing. I am building a person from scratch inside my body. The least you can do is be gracious about my serendipity choices." Sera stared at her. "Also," Rosie added, "I know things." "What things?" Rosie smiled, serene as a lake. "Dinner's at 7, she said, and went to find Owen. The dinner table seated 6 comfortably, with Theo at the head, Owen beside Rosie, and Callum's mother, June, who had arrived on a later train and been collected with zero drama by Callum himself. Seated beside Theo, it left Sera and Callum naturally side by side. Naturally, inevitably, with the precision of a setup. June Price was 64 and entirely worth meeting. She had silver. Hair she wore short, a laugh that arrived from somewhere deep and genuine, and the quality of listening that made you feel while she was looking at you, that you were being genuinely seen, she asked Sera about her work with the interest of someone who actually wanted to know, and Sera found herself talking about the brand identity, work, about what she loved and what exhausted her, in a way she rarely did with strangers. "You care about the work that lasts," June said. "I do." Sera was slightly surprised by how readily she'd said it. "Cal's the same way," June said, without looking at her son, and Callum's expression shifted in the way of someone who knows his. Mother is doing something and has chosen not to prevent it. Theo was talking to June about the town, about Cedar Falls in winter, and somewhere in the overlap and warmth of the table, Sera became aware that Callum had refilled her wine glass without her noticing, and that she'd been noticing him do small things like this all evening, quietly, without announcement, the way someone does who has been paying attention longer than you knew. She looked at him sideways. He was listening to Theo. He laughed at something her father said, genuinely, not performing. It and Theo's face lit up with the pleasure of a man whose joke has landed. Sera thought, he is very difficult to dislike in person. She thought, I may have been wrong about some things. She thought, don't. She picked up her wine glass. The attic room was, she had to admit, as a designer, actually beautiful. Sloped cedar ceiling. A small iron fireplace that actually worked. A window seat her mother had installed it, she remembered. The summer Sera was 14, stuffed with old cushions and faded blue, with a view of the back garden and the tree line, and, on clear nights, enough sky to remind you what stars looked like before the city taught you to forget them. The bed was in the center, practical, unavoidable. She was making her side when Callum came upstairs, carrying both their bags, because he'd apparently collected hers from the hallway, which she would have said something about, except that she realized, done exactly 0 things to retrieve it herself. He set his bag on the right side. He did not make any remark about the arrangement. The fireplace works, he said. I checked with your father. I know it works, she said. My mother used to light it in December. She said the central heating was fine for surviving, but this was for actually living. He was quiet for a moment. He had learned, she was beginning to notice, when to be quiet. It was not the silence of someone who didn't know what to say. It was the silence of someone who understood that some things deserved more than words. He knelt and lit the fireplace. She watched him do it, the careful, efficient way he worked, the steadiness of his hands, and felt something turn over in her chest. Callum, she said, before she decided to. He looked up. The thing I said. She stopped. Tried again. The creatively safe. No, 18 months ago. At the Harmon dinner, she met his eyes. I said it to win a client, and I didn't think you could hear. And both. One of those things were wrong. He held her gaze. Not wounded, not magnanimous, just present. I know, he said. That's it? What else would there be? He stood. You said something unkind. That you've clearly thought about. I heard it, I thought about it too. Some of it was even useful. A pause. Is this the conversation where we decide if we're starting over? I don't know what kind of conversation this is, she said honestly. That's fine, he said. We have time. He looked at the window. Go to sleep, Sera. We can figure out the rest in the morning. She looked at him by firelight, the specific quality of him, steady and unhurried and real, and thought, I genuinely don't know what to do with a man like this. She went to sleep. In the night, the fire settled. Snow began to fall. She was aware, even in sleep, of the warmth of him on the other side of the bed. It was the specific, confusing comfort of something you didn't know you'd been cold without. She arrived on Saturday morning in a rental car, unannounced. Diana Mercer stood on the Winfield porch in a coat that cost more than most people's rent, her dark hair perfect, her smile arriving slightly before her eyes did, as it always did, beautiful and precise, and belonging to someone who had long ago learned to deploy warmth rather than feel it. Surprise, she said when Theo opened the door. Sera came into the hall, mug in hand, and stopped. Diana, she said, what are you doing here? I was visiting friends in Burlington, and I thought Sera always talks. About Cedar Falls? I've never seen it. Why not? She spread her hands. I hope it's okay. I can stay at the inn in town if... Of course not, Theo said, because Theo was the kind of man who would invite a stranger out of the cold without a second thought. We have plenty of room. Sera looked at her father. She looked at Diana. She thought something is wrong. She thought it before quick flashes. Easily dismissed. The way Diana sometimes knew things she shouldn't. The way certain opportunities had dried up around the time Diana had been in the same room. The way Diana always had the most careful, attentive interest in Sera's new projects when they were still in the vulnerable early stages. She dismissed it, as she always did. Not this time, though a small, cold part of her, the part that designed for a living and knew when something was subtly off, filed the moment. Away. Diana came inside. Callum was in the kitchen with his coffee. When he saw Diana, something crossed his face. Not surprise, not pleasure, something older recognition, and with it, a tightening, the kind a person does when they know they're about to need to be careful. Sera saw it. She noted it. She said nothing. Yet. Diana was masterful. This was the most accurate word. She was warm to Theo, attentive to Rosie's pregnancy, with the focused interest of someone who had studied what attentiveness looked like. She was gracious to June, charming to Owen. She helped with dinner cleanup without being asked, which earned her Theo's immediate and permanent affection. With Callum, she was careful, friendly in a deliberately surface way, the way you are with someone who knows something you don't want known. Sera watched this with Sera herself. Diana was exactly what she always was, the best. Friend, warm, solicitous, asking about the Halcyon projects with that laser attention she always gave Sera's work. Tell me everything about the new campaign, she said. I want to hear it from the beginning. Sera talked. She always talked to Diana about work. Diana was safe. She'd always believed a friend who understood the industry, who asked smart questions, who remembered details. Callum, across the room, was reading, but she noticed she was beginning to notice more things about him. The way you notice the specific quality of silence from a particular source, that his book had not turned a page in 20 minutes. That night, she went upstairs first. She was brushing her teeth when Callum came into the attic room, closed the door, and leaned against it. She looked at him in the mirror. You know, Diana, she said, not a question. We've met, he said carefully. That's not what your face said this morning. He was quiet, the kind of quiet that was holding something. Callum, it's not mine to tell, he said. There are things I think you should, you know, but the way you find out matters. And I won't be the person who tells you something that could hurt you before I'm certain. She turned around. Certain of what? That I'm right. He met her eyes. Give me a little time, please. She looked at him for a long moment, at the steadiness of him, the care in him, the genuine concern that was not performing concern. Okay, she said finally, but don't keep me in the dark long. I won't, he said. I promise. She went to bed. He sat by the window for a long time. She knew, because the firelight changed with him in it. She did not sleep easily. The next 3 days were Cedar Falls doing what Cedar Falls did best, providing the kind of unhurried, pine-scented, firelit context in which the things you'd been avoiding had nowhere to hide. They walked the main street together, all of them, usually Rosie, in the middle with one hand on Owen and one on whoever was closest. And the town glittered with Christmas lights and smelled of wood smoke. And Theo ran into people he'd known for 40 years and introduced everyone with the uncomplicated pride of a man who likes his life. Callum bought a book from the used bookshop on the corner. He spent 10 minutes choosing it, which Sera watched through the window while pretending to look at a display of carved ornaments. He came outside, with it tucked under his arm, and found her watching. "Anything good?" she asked. He held it up. A collection of architectural essays from the 1960s, dog-eared and slightly cracked on the spine. "Probably not," he said, "but the binding is beautiful." She looked at the book, then at him. "You like things that are old," she said. "Things that show their age. I like things that are honest about what they've been through." He said. The sentence sat between them in the winter air like something that meant more than buildings. That evening, they ended up alone in the kitchen by accident, Theo. Watching television, June reading, Owen and Rosie, in a whispered disagreement about baby names. Diana conspicuously in the living room with her phone. Callum was making tea with the practiced ease of someone who'd done it in many kitchens, and Sera sat on the counter, the way she'd sat on this particular counter since she was 7, and they talked. Really talked about work and what it meant, about the projects that stayed with you, about the difference between making something beautiful and making something true. He told her about a school renovation he'd done in his first year, a small public school in a neighborhood with no money, and how the principal had cried when she saw what he'd done with the light in the library, because she'd told him the kids who needed the most help always gravitated to the darkest corner, and he'd made that corner the best place in the room. Sera was quiet when he finished. "You kept that," she said. "I keep most things," he said. "The creatively safe thing." He looked at her. "I told you. I thought about it." "Were you angry?" He considered this briefly. "And then I was interested in the idea that you saw me that way, that you'd been looking closely enough to have a specific opinion." He looked at his mug. "I'd rather be seen wrong than not seen at all." Something in her chest made a sound it wasn't supposed to make. She looked at him in the kitchen light, her mother's kitchen, her mother's blue tiles, and she thought, "I have been wrong about so many things." She thought, "I don't know when that happened." She thought, "I think it happened long before this week." She was coming down the back stairs when she heard his voice. She stopped. Callum was in the study on the phone. She caught fragments, his voice low, serious. "The Halcyon account. Yes, I'm looking into it. She doesn't. I know yet. Keep this between us for now." She stood on the stairs. Her heart did something cold and mechanical. Halcyon. Her firm. She doesn't know. Keep this between us. She had a competitor. She had a man in her family's house who worked. In her industry, she had 3 years of rivalry and a professional history of watching him win things she'd worked for. And she'd had 2 days of lowered guard, of kitchen conversations and shared fireside silences and the terrifying beginning of trust. She was a fool. She went upstairs. She sat on the window seat and looked at the snow and told herself a story, the same story she'd been telling herself for 8 years. That this was the cost of opening the window, that the cold always came in, that she'd been right to keep the walls up, and the moment she'd let one brick shift, here was the consequence, cold and exact. When Callum came upstairs an hour later, she was at her desk with her, laptop open and her professional face fully assembled. "Can we talk?" he said. "I'm working." "Sera, I'd rather not." He went still. He read her the way he read buildings, looking for the fault lines, the places where pressure had done something to the structure. "Whatever you heard," he said very quietly, "it isn't what you think." She looked at her screen. "I didn't hear anything." A long pause. "Okay," he said, and then because he was Callum, and apparently he had decided something he did not push, he sat in the chair by the fireplace, and opened his book and stayed. Not leaving, not pressing. Just present. She hated that more than she would have hated a fight. Rosie found her in the garden the next morning. Not found cornered. Rosie moved with surprising purpose for a woman. 6 months pregnant, and she came around the corner of the house in her coat and her boots with the expression of a woman who has decided a conversation is happening. He's not betraying you, Rosie said. Sera looked up from the frozen garden. I don't know what you. Sera, stop. Rosie lowered herself onto the garden bench with the play. Careful dignity of someone navigating a new center of gravity. Owen told me what Callum's been working on. Not the details Callum asked. Him not to share them yet, but Owen told me enough. She looked at her sister directly. He is not doing anything against you. You need to trust that for another day or two. I've known him 4 years as a competitor. And for 4 years, Rosie said, he's been the one person in your professional world who's taken you seriously enough to argue back. She tilted her head. Name me one other person who does that. Sera opened her mouth, closed it. Diana agrees with everything I say, she said. Yes, said Rosie, she does. Something about the way she said it. What do you know? Sera asked. Rosie looked at her. I know that the people who truly see you are usually the ones you've been trying the hardest to push away. She stood carefully. Give him the day if he hasn't told you. Everything by tonight, I'll personally interrogate him. She patted Sera's shoulder. I'm growing a person. I can be very intimidating. Sera sat in the frozen garden for a long time after Rosie went inside. She thought about the way Callum had stayed in the chair last night. Not pushing, not leaving. She thought about what it meant not as strategy, but as character. To stay when someone has shut the door on you. Miranda Lyle drove up from Burlington on Tuesday. Sera had not been told she was coming. Miranda was Halcyon's director of client relations, precise, efficient, and possessed of the particular quality of people who exist in boardrooms. She was always the most composed person in a room that was trying to become uncomfortable. She arrived at noon. She asked if she could speak to Sera privately. She looked, when she came in, at Diana, who had come downstairs at the sound of a car with an expression of cool recognition. Diana looked back. Something moved in Diana's face that Sera had never seen there before. Something that looked like calculation. And underneath that, something that looked like fear. CO offered tea. Miranda accepted. Sera led her to the back sitting room, the small one, her mother's room, with the shelves of books and the particular smell of cedar and old paper. I'll be direct, Miranda said, which was what people said right before. They said something you weren't ready for. We've had an external audit of the creative director selection process from 3 years ago. Sera's hands were still on the arms of the chair. There were irregularities, Miranda said, in how your portfolio was represented to the selection committee. The room was very quiet. What kind of irregularities? Sera said. Your personal work, the pieces you submitted in confidence, the ones meant to show the committee the depth of your conceptual range. They were presented with accompanying notes. Miranda met her eyes. Notes that did not come from you. Notes that characterized your work as emotionally volatile and commercially uncommitted. Notes that the committee found compelling at the time. The cedar room. The smell of old paper. Who? Sera said. It came out very flat and very even, the way things came out when she was operating from somewhere below anger. We're still formalizing the documentation, Miranda said, but I came here because I wanted you to hear it from me first before it becomes official, because you deserve to know, Sera, 3 years ago and now. Who wrote the notes? Miranda. Miranda looked at her steadily. We believe, she said, that they were authored by someone you trusted. Sera sat in her mother's room for a long time after Miranda left to make phone calls. She sat with it the way you sit with a diagnosis, not refusing it, not yet capable of fully accepting it, just holding it up to the light and turning it slowly. Diana. She assembled it quietly, the way she assembled a design piece by piece, looking for the logic of the structure. The way Diana always needed to know what Sera was working on early. The way certain client conversations had cooled suddenly after Sera had shared the direction. With Diana, the Creston pitch, where Sera had shown Diana the concept 3 days before and then found her presentation boards preempted in the room, the Ridgeway account. She stopped. The Ridgeway account. She'd shown Diana her approach. She'd been excited for once about a project, and she'd told Diana about it the way you tell someone you trust, fully, generously, believing in the safety of the telling. And then Callum had won it by 4%. Her stomach turned. No. She went through the logic again, cold and precise, the way she would examine a building for structural failure. Had Callum. No. She thought of the study of the phone call she'd overheard. She thought all of the way he'd looked when Diana had walked through the door, not surprised recognition, and with it, concern for Sera, not strategy. She thought of Rosie in the garden. Give him the day. She got up. She found Callum on the porch. He was waiting. She understood, looking at him, that he had been waiting for this conversation since the moment Miranda's car had pulled up. The phone call, she said, the one I heard. I was talking to Breck, he said, my partner. He had a contact at Halcyon, someone in admin. He'd come across something that didn't add up about the creative director selection. I asked him to look into it quietly before I said anything to you, because I needed to. Be sure. He met her eyes. I've known for a week that something was wrong. I didn't know it was Diana until Breck confirmed it 2 days ago. You knew, she said. I suspected, and then I knew. A pause. I was going to tell you. Tonight, I didn't know Miranda was coming. The cold pressed around them, the snow on the porch railing, the tree, line dark and still. Why didn't you tell me immediately, she said, when you suspected? Because you don't trust me yet, he said simply, and I needed to bring you the whole truth, not a suspicion. Because if I was wrong, or if I told you in a way that didn't have the evidence behind it, you would have thought I was trying to turn you against your closest friend for competitive reasons. He looked at her steadily. I needed you to be able to believe me when I told you. She looked at him, at the man who had carried someone else's truth carefully for a week in a house where he was a guest, in order to bring it to her in a way she could hold. Callum, she said. I'm sorry I assumed the worst. You were protecting yourself, he said. I understand that. That doesn't make it. It makes it human, he said. That's enough. She looked at the snow and the porch light and the dark tree line, and she breathed. Diana was in the kitchen when they came back inside. She was pouring coffee with the practiced ease of a woman who had been making herself at home in other people's spaces for years. And she looked up when they entered, both of them, together, and something moved through her face. Miranda was here, Diana said. Yes, Sera said. A pause. Diana set down the coffee pot. She was very composed. She had always been very composed. This was her gift and her tell. The composure that came not from peace, but from management. Sera, don't, Sera said, quietly. Please don't explain it to me as anything other than what it was. The kitchen was absolutely still. Diana looked at her for a long moment. In that moment, Sera saw something she hadn't let herself see before, the calculation behind, the warmth, the structure of a friendship that had always run on Diana's terms, in Diana's direction, for Diana's purposes. You were too good, Diana said, and the strange thing was that it came out sounding almost honest. You were going to get everything, and I had worked just as hard, and nobody was looking at me the way they looked at you, and she stopped. It was one email, a few notes. It cost me the creative director position, Sera said. It cost me 3 years of believing I wasn't enough, of working twice as hard, trying to understand what I'd done wrong. Her voice was steady. It wasn't one email, Diana. It was every pitch you extracted from me. Before I'd finished it, it was the Creston concept. It was Ridgeway. She stopped. Was Ridgeway you? A silence that was its own answer. Did you give Callum my approach? Diana's jaw tightened. I didn't give it to him. I mentioned the direction to someone who... You took my work, Sera said, and you walked it out of our work. Friendship, and handed it to someone else because it was useful to you. She was not shouting, she was not crying, she was clear and cold and certain in the way of someone who has spent a lifetime knowing when a design is wrong and has finally been given the evidence to say so. And you called that friendship for 6 years. Diana said nothing. I need you to leave, Sera said. Sera. Now, Diana, please. She left. Theo, who had appeared in the doorway at some point, watched her go with the face of a man who understood now something he had only half seen before. When the door closed, the kitchen was very quiet. Rosie appeared from the hallway. She said nothing. She crossed the room and put her arms around Sera's shoulders, belly, and all. And Sera stood inside her sister's arms and felt, for the first time in a long time, that she was allowed to be held. Callum stayed in the doorway. He did not try to make it better. He just stayed. Miranda stayed for dinner. This was unexpected, but Cedar Falls and Theo Winfield conspired to make it feel inevitable. And by 7 o'clock, Miranda was at the table with the slightly shell-shocked expression of someone who had driven up from Burlington to deliver difficult news and had somehow ended up eating pot roast with a family that assumed you stayed. After dinner, she and Sera sat at the kitchen table alone. We want to offer you a corrected outcome, Miranda said, formally. The creative director position you should have been given 3 years. As a go, it's being restructured, broader scope, different title, more. Aligned with the direction the firm is taking, we want it to be yours. Sera held her coffee mug. We should have caught this sooner, Miranda said. The committee, you should have questioned the notes. I should have questioned them. That's a failure I own. She paused. But we're here now, and what we can do is make it right going forward. Sera was quiet. I need to think about it, she said. Miranda nodded. Of course. The scope, Sera said, the broader scope. Tell me what that means. And Miranda told her a new division, brand identity, and spatial. Design, integrated, the kind of work that sat at the intersection of everything Sera had been doing separately for years, the thing she'd been trying to build toward without having the position to do it from. The thing she'd been working twice as hard to prove she deserved. She was quiet for a long time. I want it, she said, and I need 3 conditions. Miranda opened her portfolio. Tell me, she said. Sera told her. When she walked out of the kitchen, Callum was in the hallway. He'd been reading in the sitting room and the light was on behind him. And he looked at her face as she came out and read something in it. Good news, he said. Complicated news, she said. That's becoming good. The best kind, he said. She looked at him in the hallway light, at this man who had known Something was wrong before she did, who had protected her from. Finding out badly who had stayed in the room when she shut the door. On him. I have a question, she said. Okay? The creative director position at Halcyon. 3 years ago. After I didn't get it, they went back to external candidates. She watched. His face. Were you offered it? A pause. Yes, he said. Did you take it? No. Why? He was quiet, not evasive, just finding the right words. Because I read the selection process summary, he said. Something. Didn't add up the way your portfolio had been characterized it. Didn't match your work. I knew your work well enough to know that. He met her eyes. I couldn't work for a firm that had made that call until I understood why it had been made. She stared at him. You turned down a creative director position, she said, because something seemed wrong in how they'd treated me. I turned it down because I trusted my instincts, he said, and my instinct said something wasn't right. Callum, moo, that was 3 years ago. I know. You didn't even like me 3 years ago. I respected you 3 years ago, he said, quite a lot. Whether I liked you was, frankly, secondary information. She looked at him for such a long time that the sitting room clock made a sound. I have been, she said slowly, profoundly wrong about a number of things. You were working with incomplete information, he said. I was also, she stopped, I was also afraid of you specifically. Since the beginning. She looked at the floor. You took me seriously. From the first room we were in together. And I didn't know what to do with that, so I made it competition. He was quiet. I'm sorry, she said. He took one step toward her. Sera, he said, and it was the way he said her name, not performing. Patience or grace, just genuinely meaning it. You don't have to apologize for being human. You just have to decide what you want to. I do from here. She looked up at him. I want to, she stopped. Started again. I would like to have dinner with you in Chicago when we go back. She met his eyes. Not a pitch. Not a panel dinner. What happened to his face? Then slow and certain and warm. Yes, he said. From the sitting room, audible despite the closed door, Rosie's voice, saying to Owen, I told you, I always know. The house was quieter now that Diana was gone. Quieter in the way of a room after a draft has been sealed, not empty, just cleaner, like air after rain. Theo was himself again, moving through the kitchen with his particular ease. June spent the afternoon teaching Rosie to play gin rummy, which was going to end badly for everyone because Rosie played cards the same way she drove, with total conviction and no strategy. Owen and Callum walked to the hardware store and came back with more firewood and the relaxed expressions of men who had been given a task they could visibly complete. That evening, Sera found Callum on the porch again. She had started seeking him out. She was aware of this. She was no longer pretending otherwise. Tell me something you've never told anyone, she said. He looked at her sideways. I design buildings, he said, because I believe that space can hold people, that a room can tell someone you are allowed to be here. You are allowed to take up this much of the world. He looked at the snow. I grew up in a house where that wasn't true, where you were always calibrating how much space you were allowed to occupy. She was quiet. My father, he said. It wasn't dramatic. He just had a gift for making the air feel like it didn't belong to you. And I spent 20 years learning architecture, and I think, if I'm honest, I was building rooms I never had. The porch, the cold, the lights on the maple tree her father had strung up in 1998 and replaced the bulbs on every year since. My mother, Sera said. She made rooms feel like home by feeling it. Herself first. She'd walk in somewhere and just settle like the room understood it was supposed to be beautiful because she believed it should be. She looked at the tree lights. She died in December, 8 years ago. And I think I've been outside ever since. Even in rooms I designed, he turned to look at her. Tell me what she would have made of this one, he said. This house. Sera looked at the house at the misaligned wreath, the particular amber of the kitchen light through the window, the way the porch had been lived on rather than preserved. She would have loved it, Sera said. She would have walked in and just settled. She stopped. The way you do, actually, in a room. You settle. He looked at her. Do I? He said. You make rooms feel like they're allowed to be what they are, she said. I've been watching you all week. You don't try to improve a space. You just inhabit it. You make it believe in itself. He was very still. Sera, he said. I know, she said. I know we said dinner in Chicago. But I'm saying this now, while I still, she stopped. You have made this entire week feel like it was allowed to be what it needed to be. And I want you to know that. Before Christmas, before we go back, he reached out. His hand found hers on the porch railing, warm, deliberate. I have been, he said, very quietly, trying to find the right way. To be in the same room as you for 4 years. I kept getting the opportunity and getting it wrong. You weren't wrong, she said. I never said the things I meant. Say them now. He turned toward her fully, held her face in both his hands, the way you hold something real and irreplaceable. And in the porch light and the cold Vermont air and the soft sound of the maple tree in the wind, he kissed her. Not fast, not desperate. The kind of kiss that says, I have been waiting for the right moment, and this is it. And I am not going to rush it for anything. She held the front of his coat and kissed him back with everything she hadn't known she'd been carrying. Inside, the kitchen light was warm, and the clock ticked, and Theo, who had come to get a glass of water, saw them through the window and stood very still for a moment. Then he smiled the particular smile of a man who had been hoping, quietly, without saying so, for exactly this. He went back to bed without his water. Christmas Eve in the Winfield house was a ritual. The same carol record on the old turntable, the same pot of Theo's, mulled cider, made from a recipe that he claimed was from her grandmother, but which Rosie had once found written in her mother's handwriting, the same ornament boxes brought down from the attic, each one containing a small geological record of Christmases past. Sera had always been in charge of the top of the tree, not because she was tallest, but because she'd claimed the honor at age 10 by standing on the arm of the sofa and simply doing it before anyone could stop her. And some things become tradition through pure assertion of will. This year, Callum handed her the star. She looked at it silver and old, a little tarnished, her mother's, and she looked at him, and he was watching her with the steady, warm attention she'd spent 4 years misreading. She put the star on the tree. The room smelled of pine and cider and wood smoke and was loud with the overlap of people who love each other, talking over one another, and Theo put his arm around June's shoulder because she was tearing up a little. And June said, I always do this at Christmas. And Rosie said same from the floor where she was sitting with Owen, and the fire crackled and the lights came on all at once. When Owen found the plug and the whole room went amber and warm and full. Callum was beside her. She didn't think about it. She just leaned, just slightly, toward the warmth of him. His arm came around her. Not dramatic, not an announcement, just the natural completion of something that had been finding its way to this moment for a very long time. Theo saw it and said nothing. He picked up his cider. Rosie saw it and grabbed Owen's sleeve. June saw it and looked at the tree with a private, full smile. "Merry Christmas," Callum said, quietly, near her ear. "Merry Christmas, Callum," she said back. The record played, the fire held, outside, snow fell on Cedar Falls, in the slow, indifferent way of something that has been doing this for a very long time and will keep doing it long after the people inside are gone, which is both sobering and, if you let it be, rather beautiful. The industry found out in January, not from Sera. Sera had not said a word beyond her conversation with Diana in the kitchen and her 3 conditions with Miranda, one of which had been the corrective action must be documented and formal, but Sera would not be the one to publicize it. Diana publicized it herself, accidentally, in the most Diana-specific way possible. She attempted to get ahead of the story. She wrote a long social post. It was carefully crafted, framed as a confession of error, wrapped in language about growth and accountability, designed to arrive first so that her narrative would be the one that stuck. It was the kind of post that people who are very good at managing perception right when they believe perception can still be managed. She had not, before posting, considered 2 things. First, that the industry's audit was already being discussed at the audit firm level, which meant that 3 senior people at 3 different companies already knew the unmanaged version of events. Second, that Callum's partner Breck, who was not, as it turned out, someone who forgave professional sabotage, easily had spent 2 weeks quietly compiling a documented record of every project Diana had. Touched with information that wasn't hers, he posted it as a response to Diana's post, with attached documentation, within 4 hours. The domino effect was swift and professional and, in its way, exact. A client Sera had lost 2 years ago reached out within a week. Then, another. The narrative, once the truth was established, was simple and devastating in its clarity. A talented designer had been systematically undermined by someone she trusted and had been producing excellent work anyway. That was the story. And once it was told, it was impossible to untell. Diana was asked to step back from 2 advisory roles. A partnership she'd been pursuing for a year quietly withdrew their interest. Her social following, which she'd spent years carefully cultivating, did what followings do when trust breaks suddenly. It shrank and then it changed tone, and the new tone was not kind. Sera did not watch this happen with satisfaction. She watched it with the quiet, specific feeling of someone who has been carrying a weight they didn't know was there and has finally put it down. Not triumph, just the relief of an accurate accounting, of the world making sense in the right direction. She called no one about it. She worked. She accepted the creative director position on her 3 conditions, all of which Miranda had agreed to. She started building the new division, the integrated one, the one that sat at the intersection of everything. She called Callum on a Thursday evening and told him about the first meeting with her new team. "How did it feel?" he asked. "Like something I built to last," she said. She heard him smile. "Dinner Saturday," he said. "Dinner Saturday," she said. "New Year's Eve, Cedar Falls." They'd come back, all of them, more of them this time. Rosie and Owen, and a baby girl named Clara who had arrived in April with the full conviction of someone who has decided the world is interesting and intends to examine all of it. June, who had cried at Clara's birth. Video and claimed it was her sinuses, Breck, who had been invited by Callum and had immediately made himself indispensable in the way of people who walk into a room and make it louder and better. Theo, who had made his mulled cider and was wearing the Christmas sweater, and who looked, this year, like a man whose house was full in the right way. The main street of Cedar Falls was lit with New Year's lights, which were, in Cedar Falls, essentially Christmas lights with extra steps. The diner was open late. The bell above the hardware store door had been audible all day as people came and went. Sera and Callum walked down to the lake at 11. The ice was thick and silver. The stars were out Vermont stars, clear and excessive after a week of cloud cover and their breath, made small, visible clouds, and it was cold in the clean lunged way of Vermont January. She had her hand in his coat pocket because her gloves were in the car. He had not mentioned this arrangement. He had simply opened his pocket. The creative director division, she said. We're pitching the body. First integrated commission next week. The old textile building in Hyde Park? You know about it? I'm bidding the structural redesign. She looked at him. Are you serious? I found out 2 days ago. His expression was almost too neutral. It would be the first time we formally worked on the same project. You're my structural contractor. Technically a co-bid. This is going to be a disaster, she said. It's going to be extraordinary, he said. We're going to disagree about everything and arrive somewhere neither of us would have reached. One, he looked at her. That's how we work. She thought of the first panel, the first conference room. 4 years of friction and spark, and the particular chemistry of two people who take the same thing seriously. She thought, yes, that is exactly how we work. The clock in the Cedar Falls Town Hall original, cast iron, 1887. A minor landmark struck 11:30. Callum stopped walking. He turned to face her on the ice edge dock, and she looked at him. In the January dark, at the specific, steady, genuine face of the man who had turned down a position because something seemed wrong, and how they'd treated her, who had carried truth carefully for a week, who had stayed in the room when she shut the door, who had given her his pocket and his arm, and the last 4 years of the most productive rivalry of her career. His hand was in his coat. He was looking at her with something she knew she had always known was real. I've been terrible at timing, he said. You've been impeccable, she said. New Year's Eve on a dock in 20-degree weather. Perfect, she said. Say what you're going to say. He opened his hand. The ring was simple, clean lines, a single stone, nothing performative. The work of someone who understood that beauty didn't require embellishment. I love you, he said. I have loved you since the first conference room, and I have been patient about it because you needed time, and I needed to be someone you could actually trust. And I think we are. There now. He looked at her steadily. Sera Winfield, will you marry? Me? The dock? The frozen lake? The stars? She thought of her mother, who made rooms feel like home by believing they should be. She thought of the cedar room and the wreath and the blue kitchen tiles and the specific amber of the porch light in December. She thought, this is what settling feels like, not giving up, settling, like a beam finding its footing, like a room that has finally become what it was always supposed to be. Yes, she said, yes. Obviously, yes. He put the ring on her hand, and she held his face and kissed him. On the frozen dock as the year turned, and the Cedar Falls clock struck midnight, and from inside the house, because the living room window was visible from the dock if you knew where to look, which June did. A small, joyful sound escaped that sounded like it came from everyone at once. Clara, who had been awake for no reason she cared to explain, made one bright, satisfied sound and went back to sleep. Theo put down his cider and picked up his wife's photograph from the mantel and held it, gently, for just a moment. "There she is," he said. "There's our girl." And outside, in the Vermont dark, on the dock, with the stars and the frozen lake and the cedar smelling cold and an entire year ahead. Sera Winfield, creative director, finally, deservedly, exactly herself, came home. And so the story closes. But if you're still here, if you made it all the way to this moment, then something in this story touched you. Maybe it was Sera's walls. Maybe it was the way Callum stayed in the room even when the door was shut on him. Or maybe it was Diana and the quiet, unsettling recognition that sometimes the people we trust the most are the ones we should have questioned sooner. Here's what I want to leave with you tonight. The philosopher Emmanuel Levinas once said that the face of the other makes a demand on us before we even choose to respond. In other words, the people who truly see us will always ask something of us, not perfection, not performance, just presence. Sera spent years being productive instead of present. She built beautiful spaces for other people and left herself standing outside every one of them. And it took one honest man 2 weeks in a Vermont winter and the wreckage of a false friendship to teach her what her mother always knew. A room becomes home not when it looks right, but when someone in it decides to stay. If that landed somewhere in you tonight, you're not alone. A lot of us are Sera, building walls and calling it ambition, protecting ourselves and calling it strength. But healing begins the moment we let someone hand us back a truth we'd forgotten we deserved. If this story meant something to you, please give it a like, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe so you never miss a story from Mature Hearts Narrations. We'll be here every week with stories about real hearts, second chances, and the kind of love that waits patiently on the other side of every wall we've built. Between Frost and Fire is an original fictional romance story created for entertainment and emotional storytelling purposes. All characters including Sera Winfield, Callum Price, Diana Mercer, and all supporting roles are entirely fictional and are not based on any real individuals, living or deceased. This story was written to explore themes of self-worth, professional betrayal, slow burn trust, and emotional healing through the lens of a Christmas romance narrative. All plot events, company names, locations within the story, and personal circumstances depicted are products of creative fiction. Cedar Falls, Vermont, as portrayed here, is a fictional setting used for narrative atmosphere. No real professional advice, legal, psychological, or financial is implied or intended. This content is designed for adult audiences who enjoy emotionally rich, romantic storytelling. Music, visuals, or additional media used in production are either original or properly licensed. This channel does not monetize misleading content.